Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Early Intervention Forum. We are so glad to have you all here with us today. Today is all about learning, sharing what works, and strengthening the support we offer to young children and their families. Before we get started, I'll walk you through our agenda for today. Then we'll move right into introductions and our first presenter. To begin, we'll start with a welcome message from Adam Herman with the Ohio Association of County Boards. He'll offer brief remarks on behalf of OACB. Then we'll be joined by Director Kara Wente from the Department of Children and Youth, and she'll share opening remarks on the behalf of Department of Children and Youth. Then at 9:30, we'll move into our first session of the day with Sylvia Kiefer, and she'll present on primitive reflexes and rhythmic movement and explain how Stark County is using this approach in their early intervention work. At 10:30, we'll take a short break and then return at 10:45 for a session with Sarah Buffy called A Trauma Responsive Lens. She'll help us understand how trauma affects early development and how we can support families through a trauma-informed approach. At 11:45, we'll break for lunch until about 12:30. And then after lunch, we'll hear from Aaron Hale and Karen Kincaid from DCY. Their session is called From Connection to Collaboration. We will then focus on how strong relationships build stronger IFSPs and set the foundation for long-term family engagement. At 1:30, we'll take another short break and then start again at 1:45 with Lindsay J. and Karen Kincaid from DCY. And they will wrap up our day with a session called Stronger Together. They'll explore how teaming and collaboration can lead to better outcomes for children and families in early intervention. It's going to be a full and meaningful day, and we're glad that you all are a part of it. Thank you once again for joining us, and we will get started. I will now turn it over to Adam Herman.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here this morning and an honor to serve as the CEO of the Ohio Association of County Boards. I know I've met many of you in the past, but if not, always good to start by introducing yourself. It's also such a privilege to welcome you here today. I want to first begin by expressing my deepest gratitude to each and every one of you. As early intervention professionals, you are often the first connection that families have with their county boards of developmental disabilities. You meet parents and caregivers at a moment that they are probably filled with a lot of uncertainty, hopefully some hope, but also a lot of questions about the future. And the way that you greet them, the way that you show up for them, whether that's the expertise that you bring to evaluations and assessments or the work of being a DS, giving families the tools that they need and the compassion that you show to children and their families, all of these set the tone for what comes next. You are the front door to our system, and your work makes a lifelong difference, and I hope that you all know that. One of the hallmarks of our EI system has always been collaboration, and I think that's why we're here today. We're at our best when our local county boards, our state partners, and our families work hand in hand, sharing insights, solving challenges, and celebrating successes together. That spirit of collaboration is what makes our system not just functional, but exceptional, I think, and it's embodied by the group of people who have assembled here today for this event. It was in the spirit of collaboration with our partners at DCY, and you're going to hear from Director Wente here momentarily, that led to an incredible victory in the state budget. I'm sure she'll talk about that a little bit as well, but we were able to get $16 million appropriated to support County Board early intervention, evaluation, and assessment functions. And this investment is going to strengthen your ability and our system's ability to meet, as you all know, the incredibly growing demand for services in early intervention, hopefully reduce some strain on local systems and ensure that more children and families can access the timely support that they need. That win belongs to all of you as much as it belongs to the department and their hard work in getting that money in the state budget. It's also a recognition of the critical role that you play in our system. So we're grateful for Kara and her team for helping us get that. Equally important is your willingness to experiment and innovate. The needs of children and families rather, are constantly evolving, and our commitment to trying new approaches, whether that's through creative service models or flexible team structures or better use of technology, is ensuring that Ohio remains a leader in this field. By learning with us here today, you're helping to keep Ohio at the forefront of the national stage, and we're grateful for that. While you're constantly willing to innovate, however, you remain grounded in best practices. The work that you do is rooted in evidence, and that is important, guided by research and delivered with fidelity to approaches that we know make the greatest impact. So that collaboration, innovation, and adherence to best practices are not just abstract values that we all talk about and everyone puts on a wall somewhere or in a mission statement. They're the foundation of excellence that has become the hallmark of Ohio's EI system, and that's because of all of you. None of this happens without strong partnerships. So again, we are grateful to Director Wente and her leadership team, and really all of her colleagues at the Department of Children and Youth, whose leadership and commitment over the past couple of years have been nothing short of remarkable. Their dedication to collaboration and shared vision for kids and families makes progress like the progress we've achieved recently possible, and we're grateful for that partnership. So as we begin today, I hope you can all take pride in the excellence that you represent, excellence that is built on collaboration, experimentation, and best practices. I appreciate that you're all here today. All looks like 638 of you now. But most importantly, not just today, I appreciate how much you show up every day for the kiddos that you serve, for their families, and for the future of our communities. So thanks for being here with us. And Director Wente, if you have a few items you'd like to add, please do so now.
Good morning, everyone. So as Adam shared, my name is Kara Wente. I'm the director for the Department of Children and Youth. I'm super excited to spend a few minutes with you guys here this morning. I have to start in much the same way Adam did, with gratitude and appreciation. Adam and Monica and Erica and the entire OACB team have really dedicated a lot of time and hours to the Department of Children and Youth to help guide us on our journey, not only to create the new department, but to implement and to also ensure that we never lose track of the voices of all of you on this meeting today. To be very honest with you, they've been at the table with us from the beginning and also pulling all of you in to ask the tough questions, to push us for answers. But what I really have found about all of you as a group and as a community is that you're solution oriented. And you come to the table with ideas and recommendations, and sometimes we can make them happen and sometimes we can't because they're a little longer term. But the fact that we can have those conversations is what really led us to being successful in this last budget. Your work shows results. Your work has outcomes, and you all follow the evidence and you have best practices and you're committed to really doing the right thing for kids and families. So when we got the opportunity to partner with OACB and all of you on this budget request, it's what made it easy to say, yes, we want that in. Yes, we want to drive forward because we know there are more kids and families that we need to serve. That $16 million, as Adam said, over this next biennium, is going to help us make sure that service coordination and evaluation can happen for these families that sometimes are coming to us, to all of you really, in a time when they don't know what the next step is. I had a mom come up to me after a presentation 2 weeks ago, and I was talking about early intervention and home visiting and preschool special education and all of our early care and education programs, because I really do have the best job in government because I get to talk about the great work that's really happening in the field. And this mom came up to me and said, "You will never understand what early intervention meant to my family." And I said, I'm here. Let me hear what you have to say. And she said, "Because of that program, I heard my child say, 'I love you.' My baby was able to say, 'I love you,' and they were not speaking." We've had same conversations around home visiting where moms have said, "My baby was 18 months old and not walking, and now they're walking because they got connected to OT, PT, speech therapy, all the things you guys do every day." And I just hope you get to take a moment today as you're sitting through this session and the many sessions that I heard Erica rattle off this morning that are going to be incredibly impactful to this work, and you recognize the value that you bring to our kids and families. This is exactly why we're excited to partner with you and to support you in your work each and every day. The resilience, the dedication, and the commitment you bring is second to none. And we recognize that this program serves all kids that have the opportunity to interact and participate, but 1 in 3 of them don't need additional services after they exit. You can't argue with that return on investment. And I just want to make sure that you all see and know and hear the value that we recognize you bring to the DCY continuum. I also want to take a moment to just thank you for your patience. The last 2 years have not been easy. They have been full of change, whether it was our grants process or figuring out who you had to contact. But the reason we've been able to make it through that is because we've had open communication with OACB, and you guys had open communication with them. And you said, hey, throw the flag. We need to redline these agreements, or we need one point of contact. And that allowed us to change the way we were communicating and the way we were interacting. What I want you to know today is please, please continue that open communication. Tell us when there's something that we could be doing better. Tell us when we could make your life a little easier. Yes, we're not always going to be able to accommodate it, but what I hope you have seen over the last year and a half is our partnership does create change. And that with that change, we can make things better. And really, all I want to make sure that you all know today is, much as Adam started, thank you. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the dedication and commitment you bring to your jobs and to our kids and to our families. Governor DeWine has been steadfast in his approach that he wants to ensure that Ohio is the best place to have and raise a family. We are making tangible progress. You all are serving more kids. We have seen the lowest rate in infant mortality in 2 decades. We are entering more kids into early care and education, whether that's early intervention, preschool special education, or preschool. And we have fewer kids in children's service custody. These are wins, but that is because we have such great partners and we have a strong continuum that we're only going to build from. So I hope you're excited by that momentum. I hope you're excited by the investments that we continue to see in this space. And I am excited even more so about what we're going to accomplish in the governor's last 17 months of his administration as we round out and run over home, in his words. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and continue that open communication and the great work you do.
Thank you, Adam and Director Wente. We really appreciate you taking the time this morning to do introductions and start off our morning today. Next, we will go ahead and start with our first session of the day. Like I had mentioned, we have Sylvia Kiefer here. I will mention her bio and then we will get started. Sylvia graduated from Western Michigan University and has been an occupational therapist for over 40 years. She has pursued her career in many areas, including psychiatry, physical medicine rehabilitation, and pediatrics. Along that journey, she married and has 3 adult children, 4 grandchildren, and a puppy. For the past 35 years, Sylvia has focused on pediatrics, working in a variety of settings such as public schools, serving preschool through high school, a school dedicated to children with autism spectrum disorder, and as a therapist at the Stark County Board of DD, primarily in early intervention. She took her first rhythmic movement classes in 2016 and found the knowledge and movements to be a missing link in her work with young children. Personally benefiting from the techniques herself, Sylvia continued learning and began integrating the movements with her occupational therapy background, achieving very positive results. In 2018, she became an RMTI consultant and has since been sharing information about rhythmic movement with families and coworkers. She is currently finishing training to become an instructor of several rhythmic movement courses. Recently retired from Stark County Board of DD, Sylvia launched her Kiefer Connections LLC and is excited to now have the time to share this valuable information with you all. I will now turn it over to Sylvia.
Good morning. Some of you know me, and technology isn't my best, so we're going to just give me 1 second to get my slides up. We did it in practice. It worked great. All right. This, I think, is working, hopefully. If it isn't, please give me some quick feedback. As Erica said, my name is Sylvia Kiefer, and I'm an occupational therapist, and I have worked with the Stark County Board of DD for over 34 years, going on 35. During this short 1-hour presentation, it's a lot to try to learn, but I'm going to hope to provide you information on primitive reflexes, their role in infant and toddlers' physical and social emotional development, a little bit of history about rhythmic movement training, an overview of rhythmic movement training, and then again, how Stark County has integrated these techniques and their influence on our treatments. So reflexes have been a big focus lately in a lot of therapeutic sessions. Primitive reflexes in particular, there's a lot of information out there now about the effect of primitive reflexes on children and adults, but they're not the only reflexes we have. We begin with intrauterine reflexes that begin in utero and do their jobs where they're supposed to, do their jobs before a baby is born. Primitive reflexes begin in utero also and are supposed to do their job, and about 6 months of age, some of them are retained or continue on to about 3 years of age. Transitional reflexes are those that help us move from one stage of development to the other. And lifelong and postural reflexes are those things that keep us on our feet when the boat moves and make us jump up when we step on something that's sharp. The things that alert us to this something scary. So they're righting reflexes, equilibrium reflexes, protective, and grouping. So primitive reflexes aren't the only reflexes that influence our lives, but they're the ones we're going to talk about today. First of all, primitive reflexes are innate in all of us. We all start with the same set of reflexes. They emerge in utero and gradually develop and are typically active within the first few months of life. As I said, the majority of them should be integrated by 6 months. Some of them go on to about 3 years of age. Some of them go on to and stay active with some of us into our 50s and 60s. Primitive reflexes are automatic. They're stereotypic responses to a specific stimuli, such as a change in the sensory environment or a change in position. A baby does not have a choice in how she responds. And I'm just going to say most of my pronouns in here are she, just because that's what I chose, but he, she, it's the same for all of us. There is a stimuli and there is a response. The response always involves movement. Babies are curious. They want to see and hear mom and dad and look around the world. So they naturally want to master movement so that she can gain control of her head and then her body and begin to move. Movement provides sensory stimulation, which helps teach her what's happening within her body and also in the immediate environment. I'm going into this in very little detail, only because we have an hour, but we get into this a lot more in detail when I explain it to the parents in detail, but yet at the level of the understanding of the parents at the time. So we talk about the near senses. The near senses are those that give information about what's going on in the body, that and the relationship and how it relates to the world. So that includes your vestibular sense, your proprioceptive, and your tactile. As the baby's held and hugged and moved and touched, she's processing all of that sensory information and her feelings about that. Interoception's another near sense going on within the body, and that's these internal sensory cues of hunger, thirst, and digestion. The near senses develop in utero and provide that foundation for those far senses. Having control of your body, and then you can look out into the world and see and hear and touch and taste and smell. They help the baby understand what's going on around her. So, real briefly, a neurology. With movement and sensory stimulation, neural connections are made from the brainstem to the cerebellum. The brainstem is the part of the brain that is active when we're born. It houses the central nervous system and all our primitive reflexes. Our central nervous system has a couple different parts to it. The parasympathetic, which is set to allow us to just breathe, so it controls our heart rate and blood pressure and respiratory system and all of the stuff that is necessary for survival. The sympathetic nervous system is only supposed to be active when we're under significant stress. We've often seen that's not the case. It's active a lot, but we'll talk about that later. So as we move on, we have the brainstem. And then as movement happens, the baby comes out, and automatically the first reflex that a parent sees is the version of the Moro where the baby reaches out and cries and extends. They've just changed that sensory environment a lot. And then some adult comes up, whether it's doctor, nurse, mom, dad, picks up that baby, holds them tight, gives them all that tactile, proprioceptive, and vestibular information that they need, and gives them the beginning understanding of movement and sensory information relate in contact with a person. So that's all going on in the brainstem, and those reflexes are building. So then the cerebellum is the next step in the brain development, and it's underdeveloped when the baby is born. But as that baby moves, myelination of nerve fibers is occurring, and connections are being built from the brainstem, where the primitive reflexes are, to the cerebellum, which coordinates control of movement, and then up into the nerve nets and nerve cells of the cerebellum, connecting it to a lot of different parts of the brain. And this is really very compact here, but movements a baby makes develop the nerve nets and nerve cells of the cerebellum, connections to the frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex for attention, planning, judgment, and impulse, the Wernicke and Broca's areas for speech, and then strong connections are made to the frontal lobes and are responsible also for eye movements and eye tracking. So all that movement in the beginning that a baby makes transitions into patterned movement, which transitions into coordinated movement, which then moves up into the brain. But what else is going on? I mentioned that newborns, when they are born, they have that immediate Moro reflex and they're held. So they're totally dependent on mom or dad, an adult. So when demands and needs are met, the infant learns pleasurable feelings associated with feeding and movement and touch and love, and helps him feel confident and safe to explore, move, and play. Bonding and social emotional development are so intertwined with all of the body and the brain developmental processes. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the primitive movements. Primitive reflexes, sorry. The tonic labyrinthian, I feel like I skipped a slide, hang on. The tonic labyrinthian is a movement that starts, it's a whole body movement. It's initiated by the movement of the head. A baby either moves their head backwards and their whole body goes into an extension pattern, or the baby moves their head forward and the whole body goes into a flexion pattern. It gives a lot of opportunity. This reflex is very important for mastering head and neck control. A lot of opportunity to practice balance reactions, increase muscle tone, and develop proprioceptive. It really works. It's one of the earliest reflexes that begins on the baby developing information about how the head is relationship to the body, and it's about posture and correct head alignment. It is necessary in order to build on those further skills of balance, eye tracking, auditory processing, muscle tone, and organized movement. So a TLR in a baby, we test them by holding them, and we drop their head down and the body goes into extension. You pick their head up or you flex their neck and the body goes into flexion. But how do we see this in a 2-year-old who's running around? One of the easiest ways that I've found to look at this reflex is to have a child watch a toy. And it's shocking how many children can watch a toy, and we all know development of tracking skills. They should be able to move their eyes to follow a toy very early, but most of them can't. So we see the children follow the toy by moving their whole body side to side, which is another reflex. But then when they go to look up at a toy, they stop. Because that 2.5-year-old's already figured out, if I tip my head back, I'm gonna lose my balance. And so what happens, and this is a very easy thing for parents to see, is they watch the toy and then we get to a little bit above their eye range and they just stop. They don't follow it. And that's a nice visual that I can see and the parents can see that, wait, why can't they look up? And so then we explain that the effects of this reflex are still active and that the child has learned unconsciously that if they move their head back, they're going to lose their balance. So they compensate. We see a compensation at a lot of different levels. You can see some of the things we see have long-term effects are balance and coordination difficulties, hunched posture, easily fatigued, poor muscle tone, difficult judging distance, depth, and speed, speech and auditory difficulty, and stiff, jerky movements, and toe walking. That's another big one because you pick your head up and you go into a little bit of extension and you're up on those toes. There's two parts of this reflex, as I said. There's a forward and a backwards. The forward tends to come into emerging first and then integrates first. And the backward doesn't integrate until about 2 to 3 years of age. One activity I think kids love to do is, as infants, to work on this reflex is arch in their bed, put their head back. And a lot of that movement often concerns parents if they see their infant arching back with his head against the mattress. But he's kind of just figuring out that if I move my head, this happens to my body. As they start to get up against gravity, how many of us have dealt with children who just love to throw themselves backwards? Because they know mom or dad are there to protect them. They're going to catch them. And so as they get up against gravity, this reflex is still active and they tilt their head and they throw themselves backwards. That movement gets a lot of sensory stimulation through the vestibular system, proprioceptive, tactile, and they're having a lot of fun because they do know mom and dad are back there and they trust them to catch them. As they mature and get a little older and keep doing this, sometimes we have to teach them that that isn't always going to be the case and accidents happen. Children learn by natural consequences. So sometimes when they get to the point where they're still doing this, throwing themselves backward for fun, they learn that they do have to take some control of their body. So the tonic labyrinthian is one reflex I wanted to talk about a little bit because it's so early and it's so important in terms of head control, posture alignment, and also the birthing process. Another strong one is the asymmetrical tonic neck. This is an often very visible reflex. This is one that's helps one develop awareness of both sides of the body. The infant turns his head to one side and the arm on the same side extends, as does the leg, and the hand on the opposite side flexes, as does the leg. It is very important. It emerges in utero and is very important for helping, again, get down that birth canal, kind of corkscrewing down. It works with the TLR and the spinal galant in corkscrewing down the birth canal. It is very important in developing eye-hand coordination and awareness of the hands because as I said, there's a stimuli, and the stimuli for this reflex is the head moves and then the hand shoots out and there's a hand, and then the hand moves and I've got fingers. And then maybe I've grasped something or mom's put something in my hand. And then I've got a toy in my hand. And we start to learn about, again, using those reflexes and sensory stimulation to learn about the world around us and what is going on. If the ATNR stays active, it can contribute to pretty significant problems in school with academics. Think of you're sitting there, and I've got a slide coming up, but you're in school and you're writing, and typically these are the kids who may lay their head down, or these are the kids that they are writing and then they look up to the teacher and they look back down and the pencils moved. It's not where it was. So they have difficulty often with reading, listening, handwriting, spelling difficulties, confused, handedness, dyslexia. This is one of my favorite reflexes because I retained it until my late 50s and didn't realize it when I was younger, of course, but it's caused me some issues with right-left discrimination throughout my career. All my therapists and developmental specialists who worked with me always knew if I was talking with the parent to check my right-left discrimination. And if I said right, they would make sure I was talking about the right, just because, again, once we understood why this was all going on, we fixed it. But for years, directionality and right left just were not my friends. I had to really process that, where it should have come much more naturally. The spinal galant is another reflex that works in conjunction with the ATNR to help babies journey down that birth canal. It is very important to work on baby's balance and coordination for creeping and crawling. I often talk to parents and say that, our bodies move in 3 different directions. They move up, down, front, back, and side to side. Spinal galant is one that really works on that movement of side to side for us. It is very thought to be very connected to bladder function because of a high rate of children who are still bedwetting past age 5 have an active spinal galant. So it's a reflex that's in your back. You run your finger along this side of the spine, and if the body moves one way or the other, you've got an active spinal galant. So just think about every time something touches your back like that, you're active. That really, really affects a child's ability to sit still, to sit in a car seat, to sit in a chair. These kids tend to be very fidgety. They move constantly. They tend to sit on the edge of their chair. A lot of them don't like to be in a car seat. It initially, because the reflex gets activated as they are put into that position. After a few minutes, they accommodate because they're very secure in there and they're getting all that proprioceptive and tactile input along with vestibular as the car moves, so that they do calm. But that first transition into a car seat can be very challenging if you have a very active spinal galant. You can also see problems with asymmetry, some scoliosis down the road if that stays active. Poor coordination, poor concentration, and posture. I'm only reviewing a few groups of reflexes here today just because there's a lot and we don't have time for all that. I know there's lots of questions popping up in chat, and I think Erica and I just discussed that maybe it would be best just to wait till the end. So I apologize if I'm not acknowledging those right now. We just kind of thought it might be best to have a discussion at the end of the session. The next group of reflexes are there's a lot of them, and these are not necessarily a group. Sometimes we do group together some reflexes, particularly the hand, foot, and oral reflexes, the Babinski, the plantar, the palmar, the hands pulling, amphibian rooting, sucking, and Babkin. They are so important in their role in learning and development, especially for coordination, writing, and language. I have to tell you a story real quickly. So I've been working with primitive reflexes, been a consultant since 2018, and almost all of the staff at the Stark County Board of DD has training. And again, this is in part of my presentation later, but most of them have some training in reflexes and rhythmic movement. So it's kind of funny. I get a phone call from one of our speech therapists, and she's got some concerns about some active mouth reflexes, and we're talking, and she said, well, I started with foot massage first. And I had to stop her, and I said, as a speech therapist, did you ever think you would be saying, well, I started with the feet first? And we both had a chuckle out of it, and she's like, no, I've never thought that. But that's where she has learned often is a safe place to start. If we've got things going on in the mouth, that's very threatening to a baby. Sometimes it's a lot easier to start with the hands or the feet. So one of the first things you see is a possible delay with unintegrated hand and mouth reflexes, speech delays, swallowing, poor social behavior, dribbling, drooling, poor dexterity. Those are all the hand ones, poor pencil grip, handwriting, difficulties, loose sprained ankles, because if you've got the feet reflexes active, oftentimes you're either walking on the outside or the inside of your feet, or your feet are flared out or in, depending on which ones are active, or toe walking to avoid the stimulation that's going to activate those reflexes. So I don't know if we want to take a quick minute to answer any questions about those or continue on. I cannot see the chat unless I open it all, so I'll just keep going and we'll talk at the end. So this is me, adorable little, surprisingly in this baby picture, I am 28 months old. And looking at that picture, which sat on my shelf for a long time, and then after I started really looking at reflexes, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm way too old to have hands that look like that. So if you look at that, I've got a little bit of a fisted hand, flexed wrist, a little bit of a head tilt. Again, later on, I went on to find out that I still had a very active palmar Babkin, ATNR, and a couple others. So that's a picture of me at 28 years old, 28 months, not years, 28 months. This picture was taken about a year ago. And unfortunately, when I transferred it to the presentation, the live feature of it was taken off. It was a picture that one of my coworkers took on a day that we were wearing red for heart healthy awareness. And the picture's live, and it's as I smile, you can see one hand close and the other hand flare open. So this was very surprising to me that just even a couple of years ago, my palmar Babkin was still very active, shows up in pictures, and my HTNR is also a little bit active still, even though I've worked very hard on integrating that. You can see one, the right side, I gotta check my hands, make sure the right side's more extended where the left is a little flexed. So sometimes, even though the reflexes aren't full-blown patterns, there are subtle things that are still having an impact on us. Oops, there's the live that did show up. Now if you could, let's see if it does it. Well, it did it once. So what if primitive reflexes stay active? Well, they really can have the difficulty to achieve postural control when sitting, standing, or moving. It can make it very difficult to sit in school. We've talked about the spinal galant being a challenge. We're talking about the head position of the head with the TLR offering challenges, because if you lean down, you're slouching, and perhaps then you're sliding off your chair, depending on how you're sitting. They cause balance challenges, fine motor coordination, gross motor coordination. You can read a lot of these things, but attention, concentration, and postural stability are all necessary for learning. And if you've got primitive reflexes that are still active and interfering with that, it's tough. The biggie is emotional stability, maybe very immature, and impulse control. And that's partly because your primitive reflexes are in the brainstem, and all of those things for reasoning and rationalization are up in the frontal lobe. And if you aren't getting good myelination to all of that, what part of your brain activates when you're under stress? You're going to go back to what is the simplest response. And often that is not necessarily the most mature response. So many children have not fully integrated their primitive reflexes, and that is affecting their learning capabilities. Oh, this did not turn out well, but this is just a quick picture. I'll kind of go over it, but you can see some of the influences of some of the primitive reflexes. Sorry, it looks like it's in very odd, transferred very oddly, but the Moro can be very common in children with ADHD. Children who goes, when parents say they go from 0 to 60, right away, I suspect that they still have an active Moro reflex. It really is an interuterine reflex and should have finished its job right around the birth time. but we consider it part of the primitive reflex group. We work with it a lot. The sucking and rooting reflexes can be problems. You can have, problems with being a mouth breather, dental problems, speech and articulation difficulties, as we talked about, some drooling, things like that are challenging if you're a preschooler. The palmar reflex, poor writing and spelling, messes up letters, poor posture. We talked about a lot of these already, but they can really influence a child's ability to participate in school. So in review, primitive reflexes are innate and they are the same for all of us. We all have this, we all start with the same set of reflexes. Each reflex has a journey. It emerges, it develops, it peaks, it integrates, and then it transforms into the next set of reflexes. And then as we go through our primitive reflexes, we get to the point of postural reflexes, which we retain for life. They are protective for us. Reflexes and sensory motor development are interrelated. They need each other for the development of the brain, for neurodevelopment and maturation. You cannot separate sensory processing from the reflexes. And social emotional development is also intertwined with reflex development. As parents attend to and praise the baby for each small success, baby gets gratification and wants to try more movements. We talked about the difficulty if these reflexes are not complete. The baby or child and the adult has difficulty with transition to the postural and lifelong reflexes, as well as activation of the higher centers of brain. As noted, you can have some of your primitive reflexes still retained, and go on to be a college graduate and not graduate with honors and do all that stuff, but it can make some things challenging. So when 2016, I took my first rhythmic movement course. I'd already begun looking at primitive reflexes through a different lens and took my first rhythmic movement course, level 1 and 2, which really delves into the reflexes. And I was really surprised that the influence was that strong in that group of professionals. We were OTs, PTs, I think speech therapists, an engineer, a lactation specialist, and some teachers. And each one of us had a reflex that either affected us physically or, in a couple of cases, significant emotional instability was elicited when these reflexes were addressed in this class. I was shocked. We're all professionals, we're all adults. We're here to learn techniques to help our children, and yet it was so beneficial to us, to me. So I did learn a lot of techniques that helped with integration, and some changes were noted immediately, but really to make changes, you need to continue the techniques for an extended period of time. You may see an immediate change, but to make those connections that go to help that reflex be integrated and mastery of movement, these have to be practiced a lot. The movements I felt would be very beneficial because I was a therapist working in early intervention and also in a school working with preschoolers with ASD, and many of them were not able to follow directions or imitate movement, and I was doing a lot of sensory motor play with them. But the passive movements were what really helped me get through to them, because I could help them with the movements and it helped them with that calming and attention. As I mentioned, I learned I had some primitive reflexes, which I wasn't surprised about. I often tell parents the story of my driver's training that I did not realize at that time I had a retained ATNR, and Every time I turned to look to make sure there was no car approaching, got to check that blind spot, because back then cars didn't have all the little buzzers and lights that tell you when a car's there. I would turn the car, and my driver's training instructors would scream at me, and they wouldn't let any other students drive with me. And it was horrible and embarrassing. And I had no idea why this was all happening to me. Why couldn't I learn this? But I had a very strong asymmetrical tonic neck reflex that I had no choice in my movement. I didn't know I was moving my arms. I just would turn my head, and there would go the steering wheel right with it. We'll say I've only gotten one accident because of it, and it was a mild one. Anyway, I also learned in that first class that I was missing a lifelong postural reflex, and I couldn't figure out, that's weird. And it was because my ATNR was so very strong, and the reflex that I was missing is one that transitions, that emerges as the ATNR is integrated. So over the years of practicing rhythmic movements, I do now have my postural reflexes intact. As I said, I have been doing rhythmic movements. I started doing them, as I said, in 2016. I decided if I was going to teach others, I had to figure out what was beneficial for me and how to learn how to teach these movements, how to teach them passively and actively. And it was not as easy as I thought. One of the most basic movements we used is called sliding on the back. We do it passively and actively. When I tried it actively, it was like an upside down inchworm. It took a while to get that coordination where I could move my body smoothly, effortlessly, and in a coordinated manner. I have incorporated rhythmic movements into my daily routine, which has really helped me, I think, a lot with my posture, integration of several reflexes, as I've mentioned. I had a few active, stress management, and attention. I find if I don't do my primitive reflex movements, my rhythmic movements, over a period of time, as such as I'm on a vacation or something, and I don't do them for a period of time, even though I'm doing a lot of other things, I'm missing something. So I go back and I integrate a few of the movements into my routines and have a lot better stress management techniques. So took some courses and then began to really look much closer. I may have said some of this already. Began to look much closer at primitive reflexes with preschool and school age children. Most had a difficulty with attention to task, following directions, motor coordination, self-regulation, and impulse control. I found that the passive movements were very beneficial. Most of the children enjoyed them. They began to request the milkshake. And I was really surprised at the changes I saw in regards to motor coordination, regulation, attention to task behavior, and cooperation. Quick little story again. I had a little girl who had a lot of difficulty with impulse control, and she would walk by kids and just whack them on the head as she went by. And she was always very, very outgoing and not necessarily appropriately so. And I tried some of these rhythmic movement techniques with her, and she was calm. And another therapist walked into the therapy room that day, and she's like, "What did you do to her?" Because she would just jump up and smack people across the face or on the head. And she was calm and cooperative for that session. And it was like, wow, it was beautiful. We got to work with her for a bit, and we did get a lot of those behaviors under control. I then began also to work with, I was also working in early intervention, and I was really pleased with some of the techniques and the immediate changes I saw in babies and toddlers. Parents were excited when they understood there was a reason for their child's actions or behaviors, and receptive to coaching and incorporating activities into their routine. And then I began to share with my colleagues. So what is rhythmic movement training? Real quickly, a history of it. It was begun by a photographer in the 1970s when she was just photographing babies, and she recognized movement transitions from uncoordinated to smooth movements that were rhythmical in nature. She then began really imitating those movements and put it together in a program called the Rhythmic Movement. I can't even say that word. Then she called it the Harmony Doctrine. In the 1980s, Dr. Harold Bloomberg was a Swedish psychiatrist, and he went to see her as he had heard about the benefits of her harmony doctrine in improving coordination and motor control. He had had polio and had lifelong issues in terms of stability and coordination due to the polio. And he found the movements had profound effects on him and began integrating them with himself and his patients. Many of his patients had the diagnosis of schizophrenia, and he found it to be beneficial for them in terms of motor control as well as emotional stability. He then studied the role of infant movements in development and began teaching teachers. 2003, Dr. Bloomberg met up with with Maura Dempsey, who's a kinesiologist, and she'd been studying reflexes, and together, they came up with rhythmic movement training, and Maura really went beyond just the physical aspects of integrating primitive reflexes and really expanded her study and has explained the role reflexes have in our ability to feel safe in our connections to the world and the others around us. In 2016, Maura and Dr. Bloomberg parted ways, and Rhythmic Movement headquarters was moved to Houston. She is still living in Australia and travels all over the world teaching, and she's a phenomenal teacher. Her beliefs are that we all have challenges, and those challenges do not have to define us, nor do they have to stay challenges. We all have the potential to change how we do things, as long as we are given the opportunity to change the way the body does it. She believes the core of change has to include physical movement, as it's our first learning opportunity as an infant and lays the foundation for what we learn throughout life. She also believes that learning difficulties are not influences and illnesses. They are influences, they're not illnesses. They're labels, and we need to go beyond a label to investigate the level of neurological maturity and what we need to do to change that so that we can safely connect to the world around us and to create opportunities to strengthen those foundational skills. Maura has created and founded Rhythmic Movement Training International to continue this powerful work. Everyone needs movement. We were at a toddler outing years ago, and I had to laugh because here's this animal, and he had a therapy ball, and he was just rocking on it. And it just made me smile that we all need movement. We all seek movement, and we get it however we can. So rhythmic movement training is based on movements that infants make that's responsible for laying the foundation of posture, maturing the vestibular system, improving neural development, sensory processing, emotions, and behavior. There's 17 movements that can be done passively or active. Training focuses on activities to help with the integration of those primitive reflexes or the maturation of the brain in conjunction with physical and emotional development of the child or the adult. And the activities can be built into the daily routines within the home, school, with music, games, and play. Pre-birth patterns. So rhythmic movements begin in utero. In utero, babies experience rhythmic patterns through their own reflexive actions, as well as mom's rhythms of her heartbeat, her breathing, her digestion, and her movement. These patterns of rhythm build neural connections for feelings of safety. The passive movements, there's 5 of them, and they're all completed on the floor without the influence of gravity. The passive movements are important for developing those neural connections within the brain, providing information about primarily tactile sense, proprioceptive, and vestibular. So for the baby to start processing those information about those near senses and begin to able to move the head against gravity. Passive movements also involve at least two people, which is an opportunity for engagement and bonding. Sliding on the back is one of the first passive movements that's taught. In Stark County, we call it the milkshake. It is basically a child lying on his back, and that's me as a therapist, just gently rocking him provides a lot of tactile input as his body is on the floor and he's moving it on against the supporting surface. It provides a lot of proprioceptive movement because I'm actually moving him, so giving him input into those joints and legs, spine and neck, and vestibular, because as movement improves in fluidity and smoothness, the head begins to move. A lot of times we see this movement and the facilitator is engaging and sliding on the back, and we can see the movement stop. Maybe it stops usually around the abdomen chest area, which then gives me more information about what's going on with that child, that he's keeping that upper body very, very stiff.
Sylvia,
Yes.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Are you meaning to be sharing your screen currently?
Yes, what happened?
Okay, it looks like we might have lost your slides just a few minutes ago.
I wondered, everything went different. Hang on
Okay.
1 second. Let's see what
Okay.
we're doing. I don't know what happened with that. All of a sudden I lost something. So, can you see me?
Yep, I can see you.
Because
You were sharing screen and then it went away.
yeah, I suddenly lost the picture. Hang on. Sorry for the technical delay, guys. I have to, oh, I didn't do anything different. It just disappeared.
No worries. You can try to share it again and see if it'll come back up.
I'm trying to, I can't even find, it's almost like I'm not in the meeting anymore, but because I wondered about that. Hang on 1 second. Where's Lauren? I totally, hold on. Yeah, we lost something here because all of a sudden everything disappeared except my slide, and I wondered what had happened. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go backwards a little bit. Where did we lose me?
I would say it was a few minutes ago. So
Okay.
maybe go back a couple slides or
Okay, I'm going to just, some of the, we'll see.
I mean, we still could hear you. We just couldn't see your slides.
Okay. Again, I don't know what, apologize, folks. I do not know. What happened? Start again. Erica, I'm totally lost. I can't get into it.
It won't let you pull it
Wait
back
a
up.
minute. Let me see. Here we go.
Okay.
Okay, am I back on?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
I
Okay,
think
we're gonna.
I think we lost you right around the time you were speaking on passive movements.
Okay, so that's a little bit farther back. I can go back if we want. Let's see. We can go back a little bit if you'd like me to. Oh no, wait, here's passive movements. Okay, we can go forward. So everybody needs movement. I think if you didn't see this slide, this is about my little friend at the park, at the, I think it was the farm, not the park. So we will just switch one more thing. Okay, and we'll go forward. Maybe. Okay. Technical difficulties here. Now we're not going forward. All right, we're going to go different way. So can you see this now?
Yes, we can see that. Mhm.
All right, I don't know if you can see all my side slides, but we're gonna have to do it that way because it's not moving forward. Sorry about that, guys. It was working. So this talks a little bit about how rhythmic movements really begin in utero. And then we go to passive movements, and their connections are always on the floor. It always involves two people, which is a great opportunity for engagement and bonding. We'll talk a little bit more about that if we get time at the end. This is just me working with a little guy. It's kind of a modified version of sliding on the back. And like I said, in Stark County, we call this the milkshake, just because it's a cute little name that we've come up with. So the benefits of passive movements, I'm not sure if this is where we were at, but passive movements are very important in terms of developing rhythm and smoothness of movement, improving head control, muscle tone, strengthening neural connections, developing awareness of body parts, coordination, postural control, symmetry. A lot of times we'll get a 2.5-year-old that's moving and grooving all over the place. And when we get them to slow down and lie down and we work on passive movements, we see changes in their attention. We see a lot of improvements in their overall attention because they're moving and grooving, but they really have a lot of the primitive reflexes not integrated. And so they're just constant movement. So this gives them the opportunity to slow down, improve their coordination, get more awareness of their body. And we see a lot of kiddos that are movers improve in balance, coordination, and postural control when we are able to slow them down for the passive movements. Active movements are beginning more at about 6 months of age as the cerebellum starts to mature, and babies begin to just repeat patterns over and over and over to gain control of their bodies on the floor and in sitting and kneeling in 4-point. Good example that most of you can relate to is when you see a child that is just learning to get up into 4-point and they just sit there and they rock back and forth. They're just getting a nice rhythm. They're learning about that movement. They're getting a lot of input to their hands and their feet. They're working on integrating those hand and foot reflexes. They're building up a lot of strength and postural control. And they're just moving in a slow rhythmical way until they push a little bit too far and one of those reflexes kick in and they go down. Active movements help the transition from the floor to position against gravity. And there's 12 active movements that we work on. And some of them can be active assist or we can help the child with them. But again, those are typically, we don't start with those until after 6 months of age is when we start to see the babies initiating them. And that's the crazy thing. When you see a typical baby, you can look at it and go, oh, that's that rhythmic movement that we've practiced before. So some key principles with rhythmic movement is we start with the client's position of comfort. We work with the person, not on them. Really strive for exactness, which means the movements are smooth, rhythmical, effortless, symmetrical, coordination, and there's a flow throughout the body. The principle of exactness help us move from a disorganized body to an organized body. And what we've learned is if the body is disorganized, it's very likely that thoughts and emotions are also disorganized. Just like we've learned, if the body is stressed, there are cortical responses that are going on that tells our brain we are under stress. And then it gives us more input that feeds that stress. So we have these cycles. So using rhythmic movements can help us calm and change physiological things going on in our body. Movements must be incorporated into the body for change at any level of development. We really, really emphasize when I'm working with parents that we have to be aware and respectful of physiological indicators that enough is enough and less is more. These movements seem very, very simple However, they can have tremendous effects on your vestibular system. And if we do too much with a child, we're going to cause them stress, and therefore it's not going to be pleasurable. And no child wants to participate in something that isn't nice. So what happened in Stark County? Well, first of all, I'm going to just read a couple of quotes from a couple of my speech therapy friends that have really embraced our whole EI team has embraced rhythmic movement and the influence of reflexes. So Shelby says, rhythmic movement primitive reflex works changed the way I approach the EI population as an SLP. Gives me a different lens to view foundational skills that include sensory processing and regulation, which ultimately lead to speech and language. Patty also is a speech therapist, and she's also a play project consultant who added that adding rhythmic movements to my therapeutic toolbox has helped in so many ways, giving me another lens to help parents understand the value of movement and make connections when treating the whole child. The families I work with have been able to easily and successfully incorporate the active and passive movements into play and everyday routines. So what we did was, as I continued my training, I shared with my coworkers, their interest peaked. And since 2019, Stark County has been generous enough to sponsor the Making Connections course twice and the Level 1 and Level 2 course once. As I said, these trainings have allowed the majority of our developmental specialists, OTs, PTs, and speech and language pathologists to have training in the basic philosophy of rhythmic movement, knowledge about reflexes, as well as activities. There's 17 rhythmic movements, as I mentioned, but there's so much to learn. As staff improved their awareness of the influence of rhythmic movements, they were able to pick out that I think this reflex is active, but I'm not quite sure where we should go. I was often brought in as a consultant to help guide the course of activities. I have a few examples to share with you. So the first one, let me get my little notes here. First one was many years ago and was quite an impactful experience for me. It was a little girl of about 15 months. She'd been referred to EI, status post brain surgery. She'd been referred maybe 8 months after her brain surgery. And she had significant global delays, including weakness on one side, muscle stiffness, probable vision, hearing loss, and also had a lot of issues with sensory processing, particularly touch and her vestibular system. Her mom was the only one who could touch her, and even that touch often brought the child to tears. Mom also had great difficulty carrying the child up and down the stairs to her bedroom, because that would cause so much stress for the baby that her breathing would change and her oxygen would just bottom out. I was brought in, a developmental specialist was seeing this little girl, and I was brought in to consult and observed her and watched her, that she preferred her position of comfort was on her back, and she just had a lot of random movements. They weren't even reflexive patterns, it was just random movements. Mom was coached in sliding on the back, because as the child was moving, we decided to try that one. And Mom was able to touch her feet and do that gentle rocking back and forth. And to all of our surprise, the child calmed, changed her alignment a little bit, got a little bit more symmetrical, and looked at Mom. Over the course of several weeks, Mom incorporated that movement only into her diaper changing routine. And then I went back about a month later. I'm not even sure if it was a month, but anyway, Mom was ecstatic that she could now carry the child up and down the stairs without stress. As we continued the EI journey with that child, I was able to transition to be the PSP with her, and we addressed many more primitive reflexes with her, as well as activities to improve her, physical status and her emotional status. I was able to touch her, but when she would go to outpatient therapy, all she would do was scream. So they discontinued outpatient therapy at their own decision. And as time progressed, we did bring in speech services and hearing services and PT. And this little girl, whenever I would walk into the house, would roll over to me and sit on the floor, and she'd roll over. And depending on what she wanted, she'd either position her feet in front of me or her head in front of me. To do rhythmic movements with her. She made a lot of progress. And as I reached out to this mom to ask her if I could share this story about her child, she was thrilled. And she said, please don't forget to tell them that rhythmic movement was the thing that helped her be able to let me touch her without her crying. She also said that the child is about 8 now, I think. And they also continue to incorporate rhythmic movement when she's having stressful days. And she also is interested in learning more. So that's exciting that some techniques that we taught this mom and this family when this little girl is 15 months old are still important to them. And they are still able to utilize what they learned in early intervention. Another example, which is kind of common, is I often get called in when children are I don't know about in other counties. In our county, we often get children about 2.5 years old who come in with speech delays, speech and language delays. And I often get called in by our speech therapist to kind of give a little guidance. So I did get called in on this little guy, and he was 33 months old, and the speech therapist had been working with him for a while. And really, he was making some beautiful progress in his speech and communication. But she noticed a lot of challenges with movement and also with social and emotional development. She had taught the parents some movements already and some techniques such as massage of the hands and feet and rocking in a blanket before bed for calming to give him some vestibular and proprioceptive input. So the family was using those, noticing changes in his ability to calm down for bedtime, and wanted to learn more. So just in a nutshell, this little guy was very, very stressed in any social environment outside of the family and even within the family home. If parents laughed, he would get upset and cover his ears. So suggesting some auditory processing sensitivity. So we began with some very simple movements. He was very tactilely defensive, auditorily defensive, and although he sought a lot of vestibular input on his own, he was very sensitive to any imposed movement. So we began very simply with people who he trusted, primarily his parents and the speech therapist. I didn't touch him for quite a while, doing some very simple rhythmic movements with this little guy. We began with bottom rocking during play, and then we did some activities for his fear paralysis using toys that were comfortable with him, doing some activities of spinal walking on his back and doing things for his back to help him calm using toys that he enjoyed. In a nutshell, I was able to see him for 3 months, and in those 3 months, he improved his comfort with me. After the first visit and introducing a couple rhythmic movements, the bottom rocking, and we did introduce sliding on the back, although we did not get the opportunity to try it with him. I modeled on the parents, and they were able to follow through and try it with him. These parents were awesome and really knew their child well. I went back after a month, and the parents were so excited that they'd gone to a play group they'd gone to every week. And it was the first time that the child had interacted with any children. He began interacting. Over the course of 3 months, he began not only just interacting with children, he began initiating interaction with children. He was able to be in a group of children, and if one of them cried, he did not run away and hide. And then they went to a family picnic, and the family members were like, whoa, we've never seen this side of him. What happened? And the parents were just thrilled. He made so much progress in just a short period of time because his parents really did follow through, respect his limitations and boundaries, and give him what he needed to keep progressing. I have a lot of other examples. I don't know if we have time. One more quick one is a little boy I saw right before I retired. And he was a little boy about 10 months old that was very significantly physically involved and had a very strong rooting reflex that was interfering with things. I was brought in for the rooting reflex. Again, the developmental specialist seeing him had already begun doing things that she'd learned and was already doing massage of his hands and massage of his feet to give him sensory information. And we, within one session, were able to introduce some pre-birth movements that he tolerated, which he had not tolerated movement well at all unless he was very, very close to mom, on top of mom. He could do tummy time on top of mom. He could be held by mom and moved gently by mom, but he did not tolerate movement. So we began some pre-birth movements, which are also taught in rhythmic movement training. And then we began some sliding on the back and some fetal rocking. And as we progressed up the body with him, we were able to do some facial massage, which mom was surprised at because he had never let even her touch his face. He did have an NG tube, which made touching of his face uncomfortable and unpleasurable for him. So this was the first time she'd ever seen him allow a touch, and it seemed pleasurable. Within that one session, the little guy was moving his head, something he did not do with ease previously. And we just saw a lot of really, really cool changes. And I understand those changes are continuing. I did see him right before I retired, so I didn't get the chance to follow through much, but I've had some input. And again, that mom said I could share that story. So you guys probably want to know what you can do, and you can help build the brain, rebuild the brain. We need continuous and daily stimulation from active rhythmic movements for a long time. Often, if patterns are very strongly integrated, it can take over a year. But you can start small. Sometimes it's just a couple seconds. Sometimes we build, and I will say we build up to 10 to 15 minutes a day. We've seen sessions within one session. We've seen changes, within a session or a few weeks. But long-term changes take commitment. Rhythmic Movement Training International does provide a variety of training that may be suitable for you or your staff. And I will be happy to guide you in selecting an optimum training and help set the training up for you. 1 and 2 and 3 focus on reflexes. 1 focuses on organization. 2 is motions, and 3 is more on auditory visual processing and the effects on reading and writing. School readiness is a course that's designed for small groups such as preschool, kindergarten. It's a really fun group, it's a fun course, and it focuses on the basics of rhythmic movement and some of the reflexes that are really prominent or more prominent in school. Essentials of RMTI is just a short course that I pulled a lot of information from. Rhythm, Movement, and Play is a 1-day course that I think is really, really beneficial in teaching the basic influence of rhythmic reflexes on brain development, and teaches a couple over the rhythmic movements. Making Connections delves farther into brain development, rhythmic movements, and reflexes. And then Face the Fear really focuses on defensive reflexes. They're all fascinating courses in their own right. And I'm really willing, if you're interested, my contact information is coming up. I'll give you some references that are used today. And then my contact information, if you're interested in sponsoring a course, it's really easy to do. We've bought 3 courses to Stark County, and hopefully we'll be bringing 1 or 2 more soon. There's been a couple things going on there that we've had to postpone them, but I'd like to bring Rhythm Movement and Play and level 1 and level 2 back to Stark County. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. So are there questions and comments? I welcome feedback.
We do have a few questions. First, I want to start off with, I've had several questions around the format that you sent your slides in. Would there be any way you could send that to us in a PDF?
I can switch it from,
Okay.
I work on Apple, so I can switch it to PDF, I'm sure.
Okay, that would be great. And so for everyone, I will upload that to the Padlet as soon as I receive that. And then we have a few questions, if that's okay, before we break. One being, what causes reflexes to not integrate? And can a lack of integration be genetic?
There can be many reasons why reflexes don't integrate. It can be due to some influences during pregnancy, such as poor nutrition, drugs and alcohol, stress, electromagnetic fields. There's a lot of things. And yes, there is some, I will say that I have seen genetic patterns in families. So I'm not so sure if it is, if I can really say that it's genetic. You know, there's medical issues if a child has some seizure activity, or there are a lot of reasons why. And when I say that can happen intrauterine, that's not to say that anybody did something wrong, that a mom did something wrong. That's not always the case. We have a lot of stress in our lives, as I mentioned earlier. That sympathetic nervous system that should only be active during those extreme moments when we really need to fight or flight is active in a lot of us all the time. And we are, as a society, often under stress and carrying and having that sequence of chemical reactions in our body that's almost feeding the stress, because your body tells your brain it's stress, your brain sends hormones to deal with the stress. So I want to stress moms don't necessarily do anything wrong. I've had parents that tell me, when I ask about stress in utero, yeah, my dad died, or my husband lost his job. Little things that are everyday stressors affect us. So those are some of the main things, but nutrition, the things that affect children's development.
Okay, thank you for that. The next one, who qualifies to be trained in rhythmic movement and practice the interventions?
Who qualifies? If you are, like, as I said, there are a variety of trainings and they're each a little bit different, but we've had all of our developmental specialists. You don't have to be a professional per se, but you do have to take the courses. In order to be a consultant, you have to take certain courses and do them multiple times and do case studies, et cetera, et cetera. In order to be an instructor, there's even more things to do. So anybody who takes the training can use those techniques on themselves and their clients to expand their knowledge. And what I found is when I took one training and then I took it again, the same training, because you have to take several of them to further your career path with rhythmic movement. You have to take courses multiple times, because I found I'm always learning something new, or changing my perception. So anybody can take training. Parents can take it. I've been in courses with parents and I've taught parents, and I've had a lot of parents be very interested. So the Rhythm Movement Play course, I think, is a great course for daycare providers and parents. And that's one I'd really like to be able to bring to the community soon.
And one last question. So how do we know if a child does have ADHD, ADD, or is it related to reflexes, or do they go hand in hand?
Well, the characteristics of those, when you look at the characteristics of a baby and you look at the characteristics of a child with ADHD or ADD, they're very similar. They're impulsive, they move quickly, they're very similar. So what I would suggest is it's not going to hurt to start, further exploring their reflexes. A lot of times those kiddos, when I slow them down, I find they do not have good balance. They look like they do, they're running and jumping all over, but when you slow those kiddos down and do balance reactions with them, they don't have good balance, which is an indication that they've got some retained reflexes. They're not able to separate and move their body in isolation. They move it in as a whole. So they go hand in hand. And I always say rhythmic movement training and rhythmic movement activities are not going to hurt, and they're going to, they're most likely going to help. I see another question about checking reflexes accurately with our population, and I will totally agree. A lot of times I cannot test the children. I just have to go with my observations, parent report, and my knowledge, and put things together and do some trial and error, and then as I play with the child, I incorporate a lot of testing into my play. And then I'm playing with them and I've got it in my head what I'm looking for. I'm not really testing them, but I'm incorporating activities and techniques into play that will show me, can they isolate? Can they turn their head without their whole body moving? Can they look up without falling or look down without falling? So again, I just used my knowledge of everything to test and make suggestions, and then we see if we get progress or we try something different. Usually pretty good. And as I said, most of the therapists in Stark County, actually all the therapists and developmental specialists, almost all, have training, so they recognize the issues that need to be further addressed now. And yes, reflexes can integrate and come back with trauma and stress. Many of us I personally saw a reoccurrence of some reflexes during COVID. So fun times. I see another question. The questions are popping up. Yes, C-section and breech position can affect it because so many of those primitive reflexes are active and activated during the actual birthing process. And if they didn't get a chance to do their job, they can't integrate. So yes, a C-section and or breech can influence reflex integration. So I'm seeing some of these questions pop up in front of me. So Erica's got control of the chat.
That's okay. There's also a question and answers, a Q&A portion too, and there were several questions in there. I know we don't have time to get to them all, but for county boards that are interested in having further training with you, would they just reach out to the contact information you have listed here?
That would be great. And if I'm not able to do the training, I can help set it up because I'm only able to do a couple.
Yeah.
So, but I can also help set it up and guide you to what training might be most effective.
Okay, wonderful. And I do want to mention that I listed the Padlet. Like we had just mentioned, Sylvia will send the downloadable format, and I will upload that to the Padlet as soon as she sends that. The rest should be able to be retrieved. And then we also included the instructions on how to obtain CPDUs after today's sessions. Thank you so much, Sylvia. We really appreciate your time. We've had some really great feedback about your session. Very, very informative.